So we're here talking about the Middle East. It's something that you have devoted an entire career to. Is talking about this issue now for you personally, do you find it more engaging than maybe when you've had these conversations with students, say, in years past prior to October 2023?
Yes, of course. I think that the conversations after October 7 changed dramatically. I mean, it's no longer the same type of discussions that we used to have even in the classroom. I think that even the day before I arrived became the director of the Center for Middle East, I was supposed to talk about election in Israel, and then everything pivots and everything changes. So yes, a dramatic difference. There is nothing like after October 7.
What's that been like for someone in your position where you have to remain impartial on a topic that seems like there is zero impartiality there?
Well, because I'm an educator, first and foremost, I was very interested in educating people. And I gave many of my students and others in the community the benefit of the doubt. I wanted them to understand that they are a broader complexity that they need to understand. And so that's what we did at the Center for Middle East. We opened the realm and the space for speakers to come from different political perspectives and different backgrounds and to express in a civil way their positions. So in a way, we kept continuing with that level of integrity throughout. We didn't change at any point in time.
How do you approach this topic with your students? Because I feel like the word nuance always comes up when discussing what is happening in the Middle East. And when you look at the history that dates back, 3,000 years BCE, there is so much that has led up to where we currently are. How do you include all of that context into where we currently are in modern times with what's going on between Israel and Palestinians?
Well, it will surprise them that a lot of people just sort of replay narratives that are easy to replay: colonialism versus decolonizations, black, white, history of the United States, falsely implemented in the Middle East or inaccurately implemented in the Middle East. So I quiz them in ways that I never did in the past. I make sure that they understand which river, which sea, which compositions of the populations, which war are we talking about, what happened really. And then when we get to that level of knowledge and factual knowledge, then we go for the different interpretation that happens in the region. And my work is also going beyond the Israeli-Palestinian conflict because it also has been a regional conflict, as we know. So I have expertise both in the Gulf world, having lived there for 3 years, and I bring that to the bear when we discuss this specific issue and make sure that they have a more foundational understanding of it before we go into the interpretation.
Have you found more students have found this topic matter more of interest in recent years than maybe over the course of the past decade?
I think that there's been always an interest in the Middle East. I think the American public always has avid interest in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's unfortunate to say that American public is not always interested about the outside world and foreign policy, but that conflict in particular is of great interest. But yes, October 7 changed and everybody just became an expert in the Middle East overnight.
Have you found that students come in with a certain angle to the course, or do you find more students than not remain open-minded to having their own preconceived notions challenged?
So it's fair to say that the students have a tendency to be pro-Palestinians, to identify with what they consider the most oppressed people in the Israeli conflict. That was the case before October 7. And so on that poll, you can see that usually that perspective held the position that Israel is always wrong, no matter what. But what happened of October 7, things changes and the narrative was emboldened. And suddenly we saw certain things that was the change in the discursive narrative. Israel was no longer the occupier of the West Bank, it became the occupier of all the lands from the river, the Jordanian River to the Mediterranean Sea. The existence of the state was questioned because it was a colonized country. Of course, there were very terrifying images that were coming from Gaza, the bombing, the civilian casualty, and so forth, that created situations where many students felt more and more sympathetic to the Palestinian position, but some even were radicalized, thinking that Hamas had justified cause because they were the representative of the Palestinian cause and all means were acceptable for the liberations of Palestine.
What do you think has led to this issue becoming so polarizing over the course of the last year and a half? There's never been a wide middle ground here. It has been a polarizing issue from the start. But why, over the course of the last year and a half, do you feel like it has been a dividing line between interpersonal relationships between human beings that go back decades? Now it is one of those issues that I liken to President Trump when he first ran in 2016, an issue, a hardline issue that people are willing to throw relationships out over.
Mm-hmm. Well, it created a reaction, the very position that I discussed initially. The reaction on the other side was that Israel do no wrong, ever. And as a result of that, you have people who come from the evangelical right position, some of AIPAC, the Jewish community, and some more centrist. And the argument was the following. October 7 was a big shock. 1,200 people died that day, or the day after, that day actually, October 7. Then there was a subsequent crisis for the hostages. And then the war was not seen just as a war between Israel and Hamas, but it was seen as a war between Israel and all the axis of resistance that Iran was funding. So in effect, this side of the pole really represented and identified themselves with a state that was fighting for its survival. Survival against Hezbollah, against Hamas, against the Houthi, against the Iranian, against the Syrian, etc., etc. So Israel was just sort of the the bigger Goliaths that were attempting to threaten it. So that group felt that any criticism against Israel was also an existential criticism against the state of Israel and against the rights of Jews to settle in Israel. Mm-hmm. And so you're right, the middle ground was struggling to find a voice between those two poles. They were attempting to find blames between on one side and on the other side, but ultimately because they ended up alienating both sides, and they were not finding real tractions in political civil society. The peace movement has been the very minority position in this debate. Mm-hmm. So we have the polarization and no peace movement. And the only peace movement we have today, this is ironical, it's in Israel. So 5,000 people that just in Jerusalem were meeting in order to ask for peace, ceasefire, the end of the secessions of the war, mm-hmm. the return of the hostages, and a real permanent peace. That is not very much covered, and that is not happening in this country.
How do you personally approach this topic of conversation when you are not in an academic format? Do you see, as someone who is an academic who is clearly incredibly knowledgeable about all the context into this issue, do you see it as your place to educate people where they might be misguided in some of their views, or do you just let it play out as it naturally will?
Well, generally speaking, if I think that the people are not informed, I will just take my academic hat. It's a professional deformation, and will make sure that they understand certain things.
How do you get them to listen, though? Because in this issue, I feel like people are very unwilling to listen to anything that does not fall lock in step in what their beliefs already are.
Well, there is a legitimate intent and position, morally positions on either side. If we go to the poll. And so listening first makes people feel good, and then you can address a critique about a position that does not take other form of considerations. So I think the part of listening is probably the most important one. But people need to know what they're listening to. They need to be informed about a variety of things. It's not always easy. And depending upon which cultural milieu you're coming from, one will find different form of conversation.
I touched on the word nuance before, and I want to revisit it because this is an issue that dates back thousands of years. You got to go all the way back to the book of Abraham if you really want to look at why both sides feel like they have an inherent claim to the land. But considering where we are today, what are two things that you feel like are most overlooked when it comes to the legitimacy of both sides, when it comes to considering why this issue is so contentious and polarizing?
So contentious. Well, the contentious is that I don't think that Israel does not have a right to the land of Israel. I think that's pre-1948. And I don't think that Palestinians should not have the right for self-determination. So coming from this grounded position, it's much more easier to discuss the controversy. So I think that it's important to have those foundational positions up front, and then discuss how the war was prosecuted. Did Israel have a right to defend on October 7? Yes, all states have. Did Israel prosecute the war correctly? That's an open of debate. In Bello, was the just war acceptable? Was it disproportional to the goal that was aimed? That is another form of conversation. Third conversations, post-ceasefire, should we arrive to a post-ceasefire agreement? What will be the agreement that should be discussed? Nobody come with any agreement. The Biden administration had a two-state solution. The Trump administration has no solution. And that is a real problem, because short of the understanding that there is something along the line of a two-state solution, which is the most pragmatic position right now, there will be a continuation of escalations. And yet, we have 7 million people on both sides who have nowhere else to go. And so that should be the one focus that people do not have and that is overlooked.
What do you think the feasibility of a two-state solution is while Hamas is in rule?
Well, probably not much. There is as long as Hamas is in power, there will be no two-state solution. Hamas has, in a variety of ways, has made it very clear that it does not embrace a two-state solution, that it will embrace only a one-state solution, and it will be a caliphate, an Islamic caliphate. So that is not, it's a non-starter. This does not mean that there shouldn't be a ceasefire and no cessation of the conflict, because, of course, Hamas has been crippled. The whole strip is devastated and decimated, and people look for some capacity for governance, and it's important. Short of that, there'll be no next step. So, yes, Hamas is not going to be a potential partners in those long-term peace processes. I doubt that will be possible.
When it comes to the viability of Hamas, even though it is crippled, what do you see the likelihood of a Fatah or PLO coming back into being the major governing body, one that might be more willing to listen to compromise?
Yes, so the Palestinians have suffered for lack of good leadership. I mean, on the Hamas side, there was no elections for about 19 years. So this is not a legitimate representative for the Palestinians in Gaza. With respect to Fatah, we also know that this is a very corrupted group that has not been a really good representative of its own party in the West Bank. So if there is a solution, there should be a Palestinian governance, perhaps the PA, Fatah, and perhaps an international organizations that come to provide a level of security that is needed, even just to deliver humanitarian assistance. This has proved to be really such a problem. So a concoction of some sort will have to happen with the Palestinian Authority.
In the United States.
And the United States.
A lot of the electorate here in the United States, especially on the left, they really enjoy the underdog. It is understandable why so many are anti-Israel, so to speak. When it comes to looking at that position, however, I feel like it comes from a very good place internally. It comes from a pure place wanting to save lives. But then you consider the other side, the Israeli side, when you talk about the existential threat that they are facing. Is there a way that Israel can go about its business in maintaining and protecting its people without doing what it is doing in terms of the number of lives lost? Is there a way that it can navigate that incredibly tightrope?
Israel as a government?
Yeah.
The current government won't be able to do it. The current government has the very ultra-right cabinet in which two of its leaders, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, want an annexation of Gaza, want a greater Israel, and want the let's put it straight, an ethnic cleansing of the Gazan population. So that particular approach would not happen under that specific Israeli government. This is not to say that it cannot happen under a different government. And as we know, next year, there'll be a new election in Israel, and will be just at the same time at the midterm here in the United States. Will be very interesting to see if there is a shift of guard. And if there is a shift of guard, one would hope, even among the centrist leaders, that there'll be a predispositions to revisit the possibility of first a technocratic Palestinian government in Gaza, and also provide for a hopeful alternative to a strip and a populations that really deserve it for a very long time. I don't see why it's not possible. This is a startup country that has brought a lot of innovations in a variety of technology. And here we're talking about a small strip with 2 million people. It could have been reconstructed. It could provide the level of welfare that will actually be proved to be beneficial for them and for its neighbor. It's been, unfortunately, there's been a reason why a peace has not happened. There's too many countries surrounding Israel and Gaza that did not want the peace to happen. But it could.
At least there's hope.
It could. There is no other alternative.
My very last question is, why do you think being in protest of the Israeli government has bled over into a non-acceptance of Jewish people, a rise in anti-Semitism? Because I feel like where the discussion is now, Jews, not completely, but more than maybe in the past, have been roped in with the anti-Israeli government sentiment. How do we return to a place where one can still be supportive of Jewish people without being supportive of the Israeli government?
Well, to just say the way you did, and that's missing in the conversation. So, for instance, we know that Israeli march every week against their own government. None of them are really anti-Semitic, but they march against the Israeli government. So it's important to decouple government and people. That's the number one. And I think in any conversations, even people who are Jewish in this country have to be able to do the same thing. They have to decouple when they criticize the government and when they are talking about the future of the Israeli state in the same way, the same vein. So it is true, and there is an alarming research of anti-Semitism. And that has to, and people have to be careful, and the conversation has to be measured precisely because of that. So it's not happened just in this country. We've seen it happen in Barcelona, in Paris, in Rouen, in London, in Munich, in Berlin. There is a rampant critical situations about anti-Semitism that has been exacerbated by the October 7. It is true that not all criticism of the state of Israel is an anti-Semitic position, but there is also anti-Semitic position that has been intertwined in this conversation. So decoupling as much as one can when discussing this issue is important.
Dr. Yishai, that's all I have. I know that we could go on about this topic for another 20, 30 minutes.
My pleasure.
For the purposes of what we're discussing here, though, do you think there's anything that we're missing, anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, I think that the United States is a very critical position and is really poised because of its support in the Arab world and the Gulf country to push for a peace process. I think at the same time, civil society should be entrusted, and organizations in civil society should be entrusted to push forward for more peace processes and negotiations that lead to not only a cessation of war, but also for a future that is embracing a coexistence between Israeli and Palestinian. It sounds utopic, but it's also the most pragmatical positions that we have so far.